All right, we sit down at Capital Casino 1-3 game with 500 in our stack. Very first hand, we pick up 2 kings. There are a string of limpers, and being on the button with 2 kings, we're definitely going to raise, and we make it 25, hoping to thin the field a little bit, and that's exactly what happens. We end up getting 2 callers, one from a player with a very short stack, perhaps maybe $70 or $80, and the other one has about 200 in their starting stack. So they both put in the call, and we go 3 ways to a flop with $88 in the pot. I'm just looking for a clean flop, something without an ace. Flop comes Jack 10-8 rainbow. So excellent flop for our hand. Doesn't contain an ace. We're definitely going to be going with it, especially when my opponent's stack sizes. First player puts in the check. He has a very short stack, so I'm not really even concerned with him too much. Next player bets $25. I should probably put in a raise here just to isolate him and get the other player out, but I got a little greedy and I decided to go for just a call, hoping the other player would overcall so I get an additional $25 in. Turn card comes and it is a 5 of hearts. So it does put up a backdoor flush draw, but other than that it really shouldn't change much. First player puts in the check, and now it's on to the player on my right. He thinks for a little bit before assembling a bet of $50. So after the player bets, he has about $100 behind, maybe a little bit less. So I figure he's not going to be folding to any kind of raise, so I just go for the jam. The short stack in seat 4 thinks for just a moment before I ended up releasing his cards. I wasn't even thinking about him as being an issue on this hand. The other player goes into the tank, and he goes very deeply into the tank, and that's okay. The fact that he didn't snap call is a good sign, and the longer he thinks about it, the more I like my hand. He starts talking about we have queens, kings, we got ace jack. So I'm putting him on a lone jack, maybe something like king jack, queen jack. He ends up showing me the king jack of clubs before finally making a laydown. So kudos for him for folding, yay for me for winning. A few hands later, a player has an $8 straddle. One player limps in. I raise to 25 with pocket sevens. It gets folded back around to the player in the big blind. He ends up putting in the call for the 25, and now to the first limper, he also puts in the call for the 25. So we're going to go 3 ways to a flop with $84 in the pot. Hoping for a good flop, lots of little cards, and instead we get Queen 10-4 with 2 spades. Players check over to me fairly quickly. I decided to check this one back. I think there's good merit in betting this and seeing a free turn card. But as played, I checked it, and now the player to my right bets out $25. He has a very short stack left, maybe a little over $60 or $70. I decided to put in the call just because I think he might just be on a lone pair, and I think my spade will be good. The other player overcalls also, which is not very good. I'm concerned that he will have a bigger spade than me if I get there. This is definitely a questionable play. River card comes as the Miracle 7 of diamonds. First player ends up checking. Player to my right continues with his aggression and bets out $50. He only has like $20 maybe behind. And instead of raising and putting them all in, I decided to just smooth call and go for the overcall from the other player who might have a hand like a lone queen or maybe a 10. But he quickly folds. My opponent shows over a pair of 3s, and I show the 7s for the suck out. So got pretty lucky on this one. Didn't play it extremely well, but I'm happy to take it down. We have one early position limper, and I look down at 2 jacks. Definitely going to put in a raise to 20. It gets folded back around, and the limper in middle position decides that his hand is good enough to play for $20, and he puts it in. So we're going to go heads up to a flop with $44 in the pot. Flop is pretty good. It comes 10-10-3 with 2 hearts. So unless he has a 10, I think I'm in really good shape. I'm putting him on some sort of medium-sized pocket pair, and I figured he was going to call me all the way down. So I bet 20, he puts in the quick call. The 8 of spades comes on the turn, and now he fires out 20. This $20 bet seems like a weak blocker bet. He's just trying to get to showdown as cheaply as possible, and he knows if he checks me, I'll probably bet between $45 and $60. So he leads into me for 20. I should really raise this thing up to maybe $60 or $70 and get some extra value, but I decided to go for the call and hope that he fires into me again on the river when a blank hits. The blank does hit, he bets into me for $45, and now I'm debating whether to go for some extra value with a small raise or just flat. I think I should probably go for some extra value, but at the time I decided to flat because I didn't think he was going to pay me off with anything unless he had a big hand like ace-8 or pocket nines or something. Anyway, he did have pocket deuces. I don't think I would got any more value, but I would have felt better about my play if I put in the raise.
If someone uses a blocker bet against you, you should raise the majority of the time. The only time you shouldn't is if there's a tricky player that you're not quite sure about. But this guy, he plays face up. You should raise.
First hand back, I have Jack-8 suited on the button. There was a couple limpers. I decided to put in a raise, and now the big blind puts in a re-raise. He makes it 60 to go. He only has about $200 behind. Obviously, he has a premium hand, and I decided not to play against him when he had a premium hand. Even though I had position, his stack wasn't quite deep enough to make that justifiable. So sometimes you just have to give it up when you get your hand caught in the cookie jar. So I just ended up folding. I would have definitely gave him action if he was an action player, but he definitely wasn't. There were quite a few hands just like this one where there will be like a limper and they'll come to me in the blind or the small blind in this case. And I would put in a pretty good size raise. I'll get 1 or 2 callers and the flop would come ace high, definitely hits my range. And I would just lead, and they would just fold. So raising and c-betting definitely has its values, and it picked up a lot of small pots. The game was also very limp heavy, so in this case we end up having 8 limpers, including myself on the button, and we get to see a flop that was pretty favorable. It comes king 10-7 with the 10-7 of hearts, and to my surprise it gets checked around to me, and I'm just going to go ahead and check this back. If I had a big flush draw, I might bet it, but since my flush draw is small, I'd rather just take the free card than get involved in it. Turn card comes as a 6 of hearts, so now we made the flush, we got an open ender for the straight flush, and we have a player leading into us for a $35 bet. Of course, I'm just going to flat, hopefully pick up some extra callers, which we do not. So heads up to the river with 94 in the pot, and comes a 6 of clubs. Not my favorite card, of course, but it doesn't seem to deter my opponent, who bets out for $50. I just decided to jam. He only has about another $60 or $70 behind. And he starts showing his neighbor and complaining about how unlucky he is. And I show him the flush, and he ended up having top 2 pair on the flop. So this is the first hand of the following day. I looked down at 2 10s in the big blind. There were a couple limpers, and the button, who is a very aggressive player, raises to 15. The small blind just ends up putting in the call, and so do I. And the other players also put in the call. So we're going to go 5 ways to a flop with $75 in the pot. And the flop comes 7-7-3. A pretty good flop for a pair of 10s. I decided to check it after the small blind checked, and it gets checked around to the player on the button, and he decides to bet $30. Now I expect him to do this with just about his entire range. He does have the lead, and it is a pretty dry flop, and if no one has a 7, he can probably get away with stealing this pot. The small blind thinks for quite a while, and by the way he calls, it made me feel like he had a medium-sized pocket pair. And since my 10s are bigger than most of his medium-sized pocket pairs, I decided to go for the raise, and I put it in $90. Now, I'm being in the big blind. It could very easily look like I have a 7 in my range, something like 6-7, 7-8 suited, anything like that. It gets folded back around to the button, who also folds, and now it's back on the small blind. And he goes into the tank, and he goes in there for a while. And the longer he's in there, the more I think he has a small pocket pair, or maybe a medium-sized pocket pair. I figured if he had kings, queens, he would probably 3-bet pre-flop. It's possible he had jacks, but more likely I was thinking he had like 8s or 9s. Anyway, he puts in the jam, I snap call, turn card's an 8, river card's an 8, and I go, okay, well, I'm now thinking he probably has 9s. But to my surprise, he ended up turning over pocket queens. So, wow, really thought he would 3-bet this thing, but he didn't. And my read was close, but it was off far enough to cost me these chips. Again, I had a lot of these hands where I had like 8-9 suited, 7-6 suited. There would be a couple limpers, and I would just go ahead and put in a nice size raise, and it'll get folded back around to me. So I wasn't getting any action on my suited connectors, but I was taking down a lot of small pots, which kind of lead into this hand. After doing that for a while, I ended up picking up a pair of aces on a straddled pot, and I ended up raising to $35. And the player behind me called really quick, and he has been very conservative. He only been playing a few hands. So when he puts in a quick call, I'm thinking he has a medium-sized pair, say 10s plus. So I'm going to be a little wary of any kind of flop with Broadway cards in it, because I think he might be set mining with something like 10s, jacks, or queens. We do get another caller from an early position limper. The flop comes 10-9-3 with 2 diamonds. So I'm a little worried about the pocket 10s. The first limper checks. I see bet for about 1/3 pot, $40. And the player behind me calls rather quickly. And by the way he did it, it really makes me feel like he has jacks or queens. It's just a read I have. I don't know whether he does or not, but that's what my feeling is at the time. The other player ends up folding out. So we are heads up going to a turn of a 8 of clubs. It puts up a second flush draw. I decided to get a little tricky here because I know he would definitely try to take this away from me if he thinks I have a hand like ace king or ace queen. So I checked it over to him, and he puts out a bet for $60. Now, the question is, do I want a flat or do I want to raise? So I was just looking at him, trying to get a read to see how comfortable he was. And the longer I took, the more uncomfortable he seemed to get. So I decided to go for a raise, and since he only had, maybe another $140, $150 behind, I figured an all-in would be my best move. So I go ahead and jam, and now he looks even more uneasy than he did before, but he feels like he has to put in the call. So I'm thinking he probably has queens. If he had jacks, I think he probably would have called a lot quicker. But after moaning and groaning a little bit, he tosses in the chip. I tell him I have a big overpair, and the deuce of hearts comes on the end. I show my aces, and he mucks his hand. So we take down this nice pot with $645 in it and call it a day. So my first day, I won $460 in the morning session, $120 in the evening, and then the second day I ended up winning $320. So not a bad couple days, get $900. Clawing our way back from the hole we dug in July. Really appreciate you guys watching and supporting the channel. If you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please do so. It really does help out. And good luck to you at the tables, and we'll see you next time.